Is it frightening? Many people find it so. We think about the end time. I will tell you that in many Christian churches, there's all kinds of beliefs about the end time, about how it will come, about what it means. There's all kinds of ways to look at it. We have, on the one hand, people who will say, I don't believe in the apocalypse, I don't understand it, I'm not going to think about it, I'm doing my own thing here with God. There are those people who even believe that the apocalypse for them is their death, their end, and Jesus will come to them and render his judgment. On the other hand, there are many of our brothers and sisters, perhaps some of you here, who have held fast to the belief that the end time is a big apocalypse, a giant calamity, terrible things going on, people screaming, horrible things occurring, and then God comes from the clouds in great power and majesty, and the elect are risen, and the others not. So there's all kinds of ways to look at the apocalypse, and really, because we don't know that much, we can't say neither right nor wrong. What I can say are a couple things. The early church, when it was trying to decide the canon for the Gospels, what was divinely inspired to fit into the Bible, they themselves had difficulty trying to decide whether the book of Revelation should be part of the Bible. They were confused by it. There's all kinds of highly symbolic language in it, and it was hard to understand, and they weren't sure about it. But eventually they did decide to include it into the canon of the Bible, and it has been perplexing us ever since. And that's okay. Even Jesus does not know when the last day will come. He does not know. So certainly we do not know. I want to tell you that apocalyptic literature is based on the fact that apocalypse means uncovering, unveiling, revealing something hidden. That's unusual. The Greek says that that's what apocalypse means. And indeed, as I talk more about the gospel, you will see how it is being revealed, how it is brought from hidden places into more of our understanding today. But first I want to tell you a story. When I was about 7 years old, my family and I went on vacation to Glacier National Park. And we had a trailer with us, and we parked it between two trees, and it was a lovely, beautiful night, although we didn't hear any animals. And so, in the middle of the night, there was shaking and loud noises like trains, 100 trains for the amount of noise. And my father, who had served in Okinawa, said, "This is an earthquake." And by George, it was. And as I learned later, we had a mountain fall. It fell on a campground where we had reservations, but they lost them. A mountain fell, and the earth opened and shook. And I thought of that today. I thought of how perplexed I was. Here I am, 7, and the earth is shaking. The earth is not supposed to shake. It's supposed to be there. That's the earth. That's stable. That's our foundation. Mountains are not supposed to fall. What is this? Is nothing permanent? Perhaps not. But it was really upsetting to me. And I thought of this when I was reading our gospel for today. And I saw the beginning of it. And Jesus was talking about the destruction of the temple. The disciple just remarked, "Look at that, look at the large buildings, look at the stones." And Jesus answers with a question, "Do you see those large buildings? And then he says, not one stone will be left upon the other, and it will be thrown down. It will be reduced to rubble. And I was thinking that that disciple had to have felt as I. What do you mean the temple's going to come down? We already lost one temple. Now we have this gorgeous new one. It's enormous. It's strong. The buildings are 9 stories high, and the stones are tons and tons and tons. What do you mean it's going to come down? He had to have been distraught too, because this was his heritage. This is where you find the presence of God. This is the center of Jewish life. The temple was able to hold 250,000 people. It was enormous. This meant everything to them. It was supposed to last forever. And the disciple hears, no, it will be reduced to rubble. Well, I imagine all the disciples had questions, so they went across from the temple to the Mount of Olives. And the disciples asked Jesus, how are we going to know when the temple's going to fall down? What are the signs we should look for? And Jesus answered them a little bit obliquely. But he said, what you'll do is you will see nations against nations, kingdoms against kingdoms. There will be these wars. There will be earthquakes. There will be famines. There will be false messiahs, those who claim they are me, or those who claim they are the true Messiah. He's pointing this out to them as what they can expect. And then he says, well, that's coming, and then the end will come. Well, I imagine right there the disciples are very, very confused. But what Jesus has done is switched into apocalyptic literature. He started with answering their question about the temple being reduced to rubble, and now he's moving into the revelation of the end time. And so Jesus says, the end is yet to come. The end is yet to come. So imagine they're thinking about that. What does that mean? And we know from the whole of Matthew's 13th chapter that Jesus goes on to talk about the leading up to the apocalypse. He's already started talking about the destruction of the temple. And then in the next part, right after our gospel, he talks about all the persecution everyone is going to suffer. He talks about great suffering, all kinds of suffering. He talks about desolating sacrilege. He talks about wars and suffering and all these things that are going to come to pass. Well, I imagine the disciples were kind of lost at this point, not knowing what to think. We'll see the end time at one point. But one thing Jesus did say was that the Son of Man will come after the suffering. That made me feel better. Because after the suffering, Jesus will be here. I don't, in my mind, envision an enormous apocalypse, a big climactic end time. And when our suffering is done, when the darkness is light, Jesus will come. It all sounds extraordinarily bleak, though, leading up to it with all that Jesus said. But I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, gee whiz. We are experiencing exactly the same things that those 2,000 years ago experienced. We have earthquakes. I was in one. We have famines. We have wars. We have all kinds of terrible sufferings in our day. We have sacrilege. We have everything Jesus talked about for the end times. So I got to thinking, how can that be? Are we living in the end times now? In my estimation, we are. The end times began when human beings left paradise and said, we're going to figure this out ourselves, God. Thank you very much. We're going to go it alone. That's where the destruction and the darkness and the suffering and all manner of things came upon us. It was very hard. And from that time forward, we have been in end times, meaning the end of this world as we know it, the end of the heavens as we know them. It sounds so bleak. But if you look at the end of today's gospel, Jesus says, this is but the beginning of the birth pangs. Thank God there's some hope in that. I held on to that as well. This is the beginning of the birth pangs. The end times are good. And they're good because the kingdom is at hand. It is not all darkness. There is light in the midst of the end times we are going through now. By virtue of Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension, we are able to live in the kingdom now and to bring the kingdom out to the world. That is our responsibility. Jesus doesn't want us to try to read the signs of the times to figure out when the end is coming and get all worked up because we don't know and put our thoughts on that. He wants us to go about what he taught us to do, to live like him. That is what we are to do. That is what we are to do. If we look at the kingdom coming, it comes all the time. It is here right now. You and I are sitting in it. We are all together. We are brothers and sisters in Christ. We are here to praise the Lord. We have each other. There is such love among us. This is the kingdom right here, right now. And indeed, God is feeding us through his word and through table where we celebrate Eucharist. You want to know what the kingdom is like? Well, here it is. And we kingdom people are called to go out in the end times and to bring the kingdom to others. That is our mission, to persevere, to proclaim the gospel. Love God, love one another. I was interested in the judgment. When I hear that, I get all creeped out. Oh, judgment. You know, is he going to get somebody for putting a frog on somebody's seat in grade school? Is it going to be that? What's going to get me? I would think that way. And then I thought, no. Judgment means justice. Think justice. And God is a just God. And God knows us and our hearts and the trajectory of our lives. If it be love, if it be God, then we're all right. If you look at Matthew 25, verse 31 and following, Jesus tells us what the criteria is for judgment. It's right there. This talks about sheep and goats. Jesus likens us all to sheep and goats, and God will put the sheep on his right hand, the goats on the left. The sheep are the ones that met the criteria, the goats aren't. Well, this is enough to scare you to death until you read what the criteria is that God is using. That if we live up to it, we'll be safe, and we'll not go to the end, but the beginning in the new earth and the new heaven. You know what the criteria is? You gave me something to drink when I was thirsty. You fed me when I was hungry. You visited me when I was a prisoner. You welcomed me when I was a stranger. There it is. There's the criteria. There's the judgment. We have lifted the veil, and we see that when the end comes, however it comes, when it comes, That is what God is going to be looking at. Did you help me? Did you help me? That's it. That pretty much works for all of humankind. I don't know how God's going to do it, but that's not my business. My business is to proclaim the good news, to live in the kingdom, and to make sure that everyone serves their neighbor in love. For therein lies our redemption. Jesus brought this to us. And so when you look at the apocalypse, you needn't be afraid. You needn't fear. This is, of course, just one way of looking at it based on the 13th chapter of Mark. But this one way says, don't worry, don't be alarmed. These things must happen, and indeed they have been forever. Just remember to live in view of the end time, to live as Jesus asks us to love. That is really what we need to take away from the apocalypse. Not fears of judgment, not worrisome thoughts about Jesus coming in on the clouds in huge power and it scares us half to death. And there's all this tumult on the earth. It's not that at all. He will come. Don't know how, don't know when. But the main thing for us today, the very main thing, is to remember that things are not permanent, that we are indeed working to bring the kingdom to the ending times in which we live. And the best way to help the world, the best way, is to do as Jesus asks. All it takes is a glass of water